Manchester United, Roy Keane. If he wasn't playing in the team, we weren't as good as what we would be if he was in the team. There was so many fantastic players there, but he was our leader for me.
May 26, 1999, Barcelona. The Nou Camp is loud enough to shake the walls. Manchester United are losing to Bayern Munich with seconds left on the clock. Then Teddy Sheringham comes off the bench and within 2 minutes he heads United level. They go on to win the treble. The whole world is watching and Sheringham is right at the centre of it. The hero, the legend, the man who came up biggest when it mattered most. But what if I told you that the man everyone was celebrating that night was someone his own teammates could barely stand to be in the same room with? Let's go back a bit, because before we get to the cold truth, you need to understand just how big Teddy Sheringham was and why the gap between his image and the reality was so wide. Sheringham came up through Millwall in the late 80s. Tells you something right there. Millwall wasn't a finishing school for fancy footballers. It was hard, physical, unforgiving, and Sheringham thrived in it. He was never the quickest player on the pitch. He'd be the first to admit that. But he had something rarer than pace. He had football intelligence. He could read a game before it happened. He knew where the space was going to be before anyone else did. He moved to Nottingham Forest, then to Tottenham Hotspur, where he became a genuine star. At Spurs, he was box office, goals, assists. He was the kind of hold-up play that made strikers around him look better than they were. The fans loved him. The media loved him. He was cool, clinical, composed, a man who never seemed to panic, on the pitch anyway. Then came Manchester United in 1997, and suddenly Sheringham was playing for the biggest club in England under the greatest manager of his generation. He won the league, he won the FA Cup, he won the Champions League, the full set. By the time he left United and went back to Spurs, then on to Portsmouth, West Ham, Colchester, he was pushing 40 and still playing top-level football. That kind of longevity doesn't happen by accident. The man was dedicated, disciplined, and relentlessly professional, at least on the surface. But teammates and insiders were already telling a different story behind closed doors. The word that kept coming up again and again wasn't brilliant, or leader, or even difficult. It was cold. Sheringham was cold. And nowhere did that coldness cause more damage than at Old Trafford, in the dressing room he shared with a man named Andrew Cole. Andy Cole is one of the greatest strikers in Premier League history. 34 league goals in a single season at Newcastle, 5 Premier League titles, the Champions League. By any measure, one of the deadliest finishers English football has ever produced. So when Manchester United put Cole and Sheringham in the same squad, the expectation was that 2 elite forwards would make each other better. What actually happened was one of the most documented and bitter feuds in Premier League history. Cole went on record, more than once, to say that Sheringham refused to acknowledge him. Not in the usual sense of a dressing room falling out. Cole said Sheringham literally would not speak to him, wouldn't say good morning, wouldn't hold a conversation, wouldn't communicate on the pitch when it mattered. Cole said Sheringham was the one player he never got on with, in a career that spanned dozens of clubs and hundreds of teammates. And it wasn't just personal, it affected how they played together. 2 strikers who can't talk to each other can't build the kind of instinctive partnership that wins games. Ferguson was well aware of it. He managed around it, kept them apart where he could, used them strategically rather than together. The tension never went away. Sheringham, for his part, largely dismissed it. He acknowledged there was no friendship, pushed back on the idea that it was anything serious. He said he just didn't feel the need to socialise with everyone, that it wasn't personal, just how he was. But Cole never backed down. And over the years, as both men gave interviews long after their playing days, the story only got more layered, because hovering over the whole feud, never confirmed and never fully dismissed, suggestions that the coldness had a racial dimension. Cole hinted at it. Others around the dressing room felt there was something more to it than a simple personality clash. Nothing was ever proven. No one ever said it directly. But the question lingered, and it changed the way a lot of people heard Sheringham's "that's just how I am" defence. What the feud revealed more than anything, it was something about Sheringham's character that his public image had always managed to hide. This was a man who could freeze someone out completely, who could share a dressing room, play in the same forward line, and act as though another person simply didn't exist. That's not just being introverted, that's something else entirely. Here's the thing, it wasn't just Cole. Sheringham carried a reputation that followed him from club to club. a man who kept his distance, who was respected but never truly liked, who operated in his own orbit and didn't much care whether anyone else was comfortable with that. The highlights showed you a genius. The dressing rooms told you a different story. If the dressing room was where Sheringham's coldness did its quiet damage, the tabloids were where everything else played out in full colour. It's because off the pitch, Teddy Sheringham was never far from a back-page headline, and not always for the reasons a footballer might want. During his time at Manchester United, right at the peak of his career, Sheringham was in a relationship with Katie Price. At the time, Katie Price, known then as Jordan, was one of the most famous women in Britain. Glamour model, media personality, tabloid fixture. The relationship was loud, it was public. It sat in an interesting contrast to the man who supposedly kept everyone at arm's length. Here was the cold, closed-off Sheringham, very much visible in the press, very much attached to one of the most photographed women in the country. It didn't last. It was always going to generate coverage, and it did. But that chapter, messy as it was, would eventually be overshadowed by something that landed much harder. In 2006, Sheringham was invited to sit as a judge for the Miss Great Britain pageant. He was a celebrity name, a football legend, and the kind of profile that added credibility to an event like that. The winner that year was Danielle Lloyd, 22 years old, young, ambitious, a model on the rise. She took the crown and, shortly after, it emerged that she and Sheringham had begun a relationship while he was still serving as one of her judges. Let that sit for a second. The man helping to decide who won the competition had started something with one of the contestants before the result was even sealed. The moment it became public, the backlash was immediate. Lloyd was stripped of her Miss Great Britain title, and the pageant organisers didn't have much choice. The integrity of the whole competition had been compromised, and someone had to take the fall. It was Lloyd who paid that price publicly, even though she wasn't the one in a position of power. Sheringham was 40 at the time. Lloyd was 22. He was a judge. She was competing for a title he had a hand in awarding. The optics were as bad as they could possibly be, and the public knew it. What made it worse was how Sheringham handled it. He stayed quiet. No real public statement, no acknowledgement of the obvious conflict of interest, no apology to Lloyd or to the competition. He just went silent and waited for the noise to die down. Which, to be fair, it eventually did, because the press moved on, as it always does. But for Danielle Lloyd, the consequences were concrete. Her title was gone. Her name was attached to a scandal, and the man at the centre of it walked away largely unscathed. This is the pattern that keeps appearing when you look closely at Sheringham's life off the pitch. It isn't one isolated incident. It's a way of operating, a comfort with situations that others would find compromising, followed by a silence that doubles as indifference. He never seemed to feel the need to explain himself. Not to his teammates, not to the press, not to the people caught in the fallout around him. The dressing room version of Teddy Sheringham froze people out. The tabloid version moved through the world like the rules were someone else's problem, and the courts were about to find out the same thing. In 2007, Teddy Sheringham was in the final stretch of his playing career. He was at Colchester United, winding things down, a man who had won everything the game could offer. It should have been a quiet exit, graceful goodbye. Instead, his name surfaced in one of the more uncomfortable investigations to hit English football that year. A group of West Ham players were being investigated for allegedly providing false information to avoid speeding fines, perverting the course of justice. The allegation, in plain terms, was that players had been giving other names to avoid points on their licences. Sheringham was arrested and questioned as part of that wider probe. He was released on bail. Charges didn't stick. No conviction followed. But here's the thing about being arrested and questioned in connection with perverting the course of justice. The absence of a conviction doesn't erase the headline. The story was out there. His name was attached to it. And for a man who had spent his entire career cultivating an image of cool professionalism, being linked to an investigation about lying to courts was not a small thing. It landed in the press with exactly the kind of thud you'd expect, and it coloured the final chapter of his playing days in a way that no comeback goal or career milestone could undo. The timing made it worse. This was his last year as a professional footballer. The story that should have been written about Teddy Sheringham in 2007 was one of longevity, of a remarkable career finally drawing to a close. Instead, the conversation shifted, and that contrast between how a legend's final season should read and how his actually did was not lost on anyone paying attention. Compare that to how the press treated other United legends from that era. So Scholes, Giggs, Neville, men who drifted out of the game quietly, celebrated, untouched by anything that made you look twice. Sheringham's exit had a different texture entirely, and it wasn't the first time the rules had seemed optional for him, and it wouldn't be the last. Fast forward to 2018. Sheringham is long retired, years away from his playing days, and he is caught speeding in his Range Rover. The court handed him a 6-month driving ban. What drew more attention than the ban itself was the reason he gave. He told the court he had been distracted by his young children in the back of the car. The public reaction was somewhere between disbelief and dark amusement. Speeding is speeding. People get caught. People accept the consequences. But walking into a courtroom with my kids distracted me as your defence. After your name had already been linked once before to a speeding-related investigation, the optics were terrible. The excuse drew widespread ridicule. And once again, Sheringham seemed either unaware of how it looked or simply unbothered by it. That second part feels more likely, because by this point, a pattern was firmly in place. Not just 2 isolated moments, but a thread running through his life off the pitch. A man who moved through consequences the way he moved through defenders, like they applied to everyone else, not him. So what does a man like Teddy Sheringham do when football is finally over? He finds another table to sit at, literally. Retiring from the game, Sheringham moved into professional poker. He wasn't just dabbling, he was good at it. Seriously good. He competed in global tournaments, had earned hundreds of thousands of dollars in prize money, and built a second career out of reading people and keeping his own hand hidden, which, when you think about everything we've already covered, makes a strange kind of sense. The man had been doing exactly that his entire life, but the timing of it raised eyebrows. The FA had spent years trying to tighten football's relationship with gambling. Campaigns, rules, restrictions, all of it aimed at pulling the sport away from an industry that had wrapped itself around football like a second skin. And here was one of the game's most recognisable faces heading straight toward that world, professionally, publicly, without apology. Again, no explanation, no acknowledgement of how it looked. Sheringham doing what Sheringham does. The gambling pivot was telling in another way too. The poker rewards emotional detachment. The best players at that level are the ones who can sit across from someone, feel absolutely nothing. No warmth, no guilt, no connection. They read others, but give nothing back. Sound familiar? And then there's his ex-wife. For years, she said very little publicly. That silence felt deliberate. The kind that comes not from having nothing to say, having decided, for whatever reason, not to say it yet. When fragments of her account did begin to surface, the picture they painted wasn't dramatic. There were no explosive revelations, no single moment of crisis. What came through was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to hear. The picture that emerged was of a man who was emotionally unavailable, always somewhere else, even when he was in the room, always chasing the next thing, a goal, a headline, a hand of cards. His children are rarely mentioned in his public life, almost conspicuously absent from the story he tells about himself. The domestic reality, the day-to-day of being with him, raising a family alongside him. That version of Sheringham has always been kept firmly out of view. What his ex-wife's account ultimately revealed was this. The coldness wasn't a persona he put on for dressing rooms or press conferences. It wasn't a shield he could take off at home. It was just him, the man who froze Andy Cole out for years, the man who stayed silent through scandal after scandal, the man who sat at a poker table and made a living out of showing nothing. Was the same man who came home every night. Some people keep the world at arm's length because they've been hurt. Some because they're protecting something. With Sheringham, the truth seems simpler and somehow lonelier than either of those. He just never let anyone in. Not teammates, not partners, not the public. The cool exterior wasn't hiding depth. It was the whole thing. Pull back and the picture is complicated. Teddy Sheringham achieved everything a footballer can dream of. The titles, the medals, the iconic moments, they're real and they matter. But the trail he left behind tells a different story. A dressing room that never fully trusted him. Scandals he walked away from without a word. Legal brushes he seemed to treat as minor inconveniences. Personal life defined by all accounts by distance. The real Teddy Sheringham is exactly who his teammates said he was. Not a villain, not a monster. Just a man whose coldness ran so deep it shaped everything around him. Partnerships that never formed, the people who never got close, questions that were never answered. Some legends leave behind a legacy. Sheringham left behind questions. If this story made you think twice about the men we call heroes, hit like and subscribe. And drop your thoughts on Sheringham in the comments below. Was he misunderstood, or was he exactly who everyone said he was? Let us know.